Najlepše hvala ministru Popoviću, a sada imam zadovoljstvo i čast da najavim specijalnog gosta ovogodišnjeg Kopaonik Biznis foruma, gospodina Kristijana Danielsona, generalnog direktora Evropske komisije za proširenje i susedsku politiku. Gospodine Danielson, izvolite.
Deputy Prime Minister, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here today and address this meeting. It comes at a very, very pertinent time, and I will use it in order to do four things. The first is that I would like to say 2 words on where we are with Serbia in the accession process. The second is that I would like to express a bit how closely we are already integrated, Serbia and the EU, in economic terms and in other terms. I would say also a couple of words about the importance of the regional cooperation here in the Western Balkan. And finally, I thought I should give some advice for the future on what is important to have in mind in order to see to that both the process when it comes to coming closer to the EU and ultimately becoming a member, but also in order to see to that all what was mentioned by the Deputy Prime Minister and the ministers when it comes to seeing to that the potential growth in this country can be fully exploited. Some advices in that respect. But let me start by coming back to how close Serbia and the EU already are. Serbia is a candidate country, started accession negotiations in 2014, has opened 16 of the 35 negotiating chapters, and provisionally closed 2. And in this process, Serbia has taken important steps to align the legislation with the EU, bringing the legal and regulatory system closer to those of EU and EU member states. And let me further underline that the EU's door is open to Serbia. Serbia is part of Europe, neighbor to 4 EU member states. Serbian people has a common heritage and history with the peoples of the EU, and the future defined by shared opportunities and challenges. Our interest from the EU side is not new. The EU has long been involved and engaged in this region, from the Thessaloniki European Council in 2003 to the adoption of the European Commission Western Balkan Strategy and the declaration of the EU Western Balkan Sofia Summit last year. And the EU has supported the future of the region and of Serbia as an integral part of the EU. And the prospect of Serbia's EU membership is firm, but based on the country's own merit. It also reflects the Union's very own political, security and economic interests. It is an investment in stable, strong and united Europe based on common values. And it is a powerful tool to promote democracy, the rule of law and the respect of fundamental rights. And the credible accession perspective is key for Serbia's transformation and essential for fostering regional reconciliation and stability. Now, the current close relations between the EU and Serbia, together with the country's firm EU accession perspective, are already making an important contribution to the country's economy and development. And let me give you some examples. Let us start with trade. And I think I have a little one here, PowerPoint. And I have. Let me start with trade. The trade with Serbia has boomed since we signed the Stabilization and Association Agreement in 2013. It abolishes practically all customs tariff, and we are now trading between Serbia and the EU 3 times more than we did in 2008. And all this growth happened despite the recession in Serbia between 2010 and 2014, and despite the economic problems that the EU had at the same time. And our exchanges amount today to 22 billion per year, and it makes the EU the biggest partner with Serbia, 63% of the trade. And what is particularly interesting here is that it grows at an average of 10% per year. This is jobs, this is opportunities, this is also leading to more prosperity. And by the way, the second, when it comes to trade, when I looked on the figures, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's not Turkey. It happens to be the neighbors. It happens to be CEFTA, which has a huge opportunity as well. I think the trade with CEFTA right now is at 2 billion. It's something that can substantially be increased, and I will develop that a bit when I'm discussing the regional cooperation. Let us then move to investments, and here I have another one. When we look on the investments, 73% of the foreign direct investments in Serbia comes from the EU. And between 2011 and 2013, the cumulative net inflow from the EU was 11.3 billion. Now, why is that? It is because Serbia has taken bold steps forward, as was expressed by you, Deputy Prime Minister, and by you, ministers, in seeing to that Serbia is an interesting destination for investment. And what we have seen is substantive investments in manufacturing, automotive industry, pharmaceuticals, textiles, food, and also in financial sector and in digital. And this is something which I'm sure is going to continue to develop in the future. Now, let me then turn to energy, and here I don't have any PowerPoint. Here we have more of a very close cooperation. Since 2000, the European Union has provided funds, grants, for energy projects in Serbia totaling almost 700 million euro. In concrete terms, it is about rehabilitating and modernize Serbia's power plants and transmission networks, invest in new electricity and gas corridors, and also contribute to the upgrade of power plants in more general terms. Now, the reason we have done that is because we have been in a very close discussion about it, and it is about, on the one hand, seeing to that Serbia can do this transition from a hydrocarbon-based energy structure towards an energy structure which is in line with the climate undertakings and climate change undertakings that Serbia has been doing, but also in order to have a supply which is efficient and has the right costs for the future and the expansion of the economy. Now, there are two issues here when it comes to energy which we have worked together on also, which I would like to mention. One is the energy community, which Serbia is part of, and which has provided a framework when it comes to rules and regulations for the energy sector here, which makes it more competitive, more efficient, and which we are working on right now in order to develop even further. I'm thinking in particular on the importance of unbundling, and I'm thinking of the importance of also looking into the governance of state-owned enterprise in the energy sector. For our part, we are looking into how the energy union, which we have developed within the EU, can be expanded towards Serbia and the rest of the Western Balkan region. And I think that is going to be a very, very interesting and exciting area for our cooperation in the future. Let me move to transport, which I think you, Deputy Prime Minister, so rightly pointed to its importance, and where we are very proud of having been your partner to a large extent in seeing to that all the upgrades, many of the upgrades that you mentioned, has actually taken place. I'm thinking of the Peace Highway from Nice to Durrës, that is underway. I'm thinking also of the Nice-Mardar Highway. I'm thinking of the Greco Bridge, and I'm thinking of the rail interconnector upgrading towards Bulgaria. They are all essential for the development of the economy and also in order to have the necessary infrastructure which is conducive for the kind of growth rates that you are aiming for and that we would like to support you in seeing to actually happening. Minister, you also mentioned skills. And I think skills is something where we also have been able to work together on, and which is an area where I think we can continue to work very, very hard as well. I'm thinking in particular on the Erasmus program, which I think has played quite an important role in seeing to that students here in Serbia has had the opportunity to go to first-class universities in the EU and bring back that knowledge to here to Serbia, and thereby being able to develop knowledge and skills in this country. And we are talking about a substantive number of participants, 3,000 every year. And we are hoping that we can expand this now in the years ahead. It's going to be a very important element of our cooperation. But I'm also thinking about research. You have top-notch research activities here. And you are one of the few countries who has associated to the EU's huge research program, Horizon 2020. One of the few countries who have been able to draw to you a number of projects, joint projects with top-notch universities in the EU. And that is something which goes into digital, it goes into various important sectors, and it has to do with the very high skills you have in this country. And for our part, we are proud to be able to continue to support you in these efforts. And I'm thinking in particular on the National Innovation Fund, which is underway being set up, and where we are ready to go in with a substantive amount in order to support particularly that element. And I'm thinking of the support for business and business environment, where I also think we have worked very well together, and where I think our experience of business environment and the development of that one has been to some use here. And what I'm thinking in particular is the SME sector and the financing of SMEs and the guarantees that are provided by European institutions such as the EIB and the European Investment Fund, providing the necessary equity and guarantee financing for small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think, as you said, Minister, this is going to be particularly important when it comes to the digital sector, where it's about startups, it is often about innovation and about companies which need to get that kind of support from the financial sector. But I'm also thinking of the work we have done together when it comes to governance. Clearly, this is an area where more needs to be done. When I speak to investors, not only investors who want to invest in Serbia, but more broadly, what they are mentioning as essential for doing investments are issues relating to the functioning of a judiciary, are issues relating to fight against corruption, are issues relating to a functional and well-functioning public administration, and are issues about level playing field and competition. And in these areas, the whole issue of the accession process is very much about doing these kinds of reforms. And I think our cooperation has done a lot. Surely that is more to be done, and that is something which I'm sure we're going to work very hard together with us. Now, in terms of numbers, for whatever it's worth, I thought it would be good, just as we are sitting here together and I'm standing, to point to what we are talking about. From the EU side, the EU contribution over the past 12 years to Serbia, if I only count the European Investment Bank and the grants from the European Commission, we are at 8 billion euro. But of course, if we would add to that the member states' contribution, as well as contributions for other European institutions, as well as the work we do with the World Bank, we come to a much higher figure, which means that our cooperation and the assistance from the EU is by far the biggest that is done to Serbia in order to support Serbia in its transformation process and in its reforms. Now, let me turn to regional cooperation, because it's essential in this context. Serbia, together with the other Western Balkan countries, has embarked on a very, very exciting but demanding path when it comes to strengthen regional cooperation. The first step was taken in Berlin in 2014, and the Berlin process was set up. And I must say I'm very impressed by the steps that has been taken, the political commitments that have been made in order to move forward in the various areas of issues that needs to be addressed, to see to that the cooperation between the countries in Western Balkan becomes deeper, richer, and can contribute to the economic growth and prosperity of the countries who are part of it. There was a meeting in Vienna where the important steps were taken. There will be the meeting in Trieste, which was essential. Paris, Trieste, and then we had the meeting last year in London. And we are now looking forward towards the meeting in Poznan in Poland in July. What is this regional cooperation about? Well, I would like to point to 4 elements which I believe is essential. One has to do with the connectivity. And you, Minister, pointed so rightly to all the various roads, railways, but I would also argue when it comes to seaways, that are essential for the economic development, but also for relations between the peoples in this area. And here, commitments has been made, substantial commitments in terms of investments from the EU side and from your government, from Serbia and from the other governments, and the projects are now underway. And that is something which can lead to a substantive boost of growth, but they need to be accompanied with the kind of soft measures you pointed to, Minister, which means that it doesn't take 8 or 12 hours to pass the border between individual countries. That is essential because the investments here are often done from a regional context. And if it is about being on time, one can't afford to wait 6 to 8 hours at the border controls. Connectivity is one important element. Part of that is also energy and the ambitious political commitment made to create a regional electricity market. That is something which will be helpful for Serbia, but it will also be helpful for all the countries in the region to have more stable supply and more efficient energy supply as such. The second element is the regional economic area. And Goran Svilanovic is sitting here, who has been much of a father behind it. It's an essential project, and it points to 4 elements that can really boost economy here. It is about goods and seeing to that the trade facilitation takes place, that the CEFTA can work fully, to see to that CEFTA goes up when it comes to the export statistics of this country, but also from the others. We all know that there's a specific problem right now in that context, and you know our position on that one. I'm thinking of the tariffs in Kosovo, but which should be revoked. But the opportunity on goods is clearly there. The second is services, where there also is a substantive area of development that could be done. The third is investments, where a joint investments reflection and strategy will be helpful for bringing investments into this region. And the fourth has to do with labor market and seeing to that it becomes easier for a doctor in Serbia to work in, say, Bosnia, or for that sake, an engineer in Bosnia be able to come to the labor market in Serbia. As you pointed to, there is a need for skills here in certain sectors. There is a need for skills in other countries in the region in other sectors. The third element is about youth and the whole issue of people-to-people and youth development, youth contacts. And the RESPA in Tirana, where it is right now, and the development of that one will be essential in that context. And finally, it is about digital. And it is about digital in line with what you pointed to, Minister, namely that this is an essential part of the economy in this country already, but has the potential of becoming a very, very important part in the longer term. And I would like to commend Serbia for the upcoming digital ministerial, which will take place in April. And I would like to highlight the roaming and the issue about roaming, which will be signed at that ministerial, if I understand the plan right, which not only has the potential, but the commitment is to see to that the roaming tariffs for citizens in the Western Balkan and for tourists coming in is going to be reduced in line with what happened in the EU. The digital is much more than that. It's a far-reaching agenda of making this region a digital center as such. So that is on the regional cooperation, which I would like to make just a point for because I think it's so important. Now, finally, for the future, what is essential? I think, ministers, you have pointed to it, so I don't need to repeat it. You know it better than I, so who am I to tell what is essential for this country? But I think there are some issues which brings together your ambition to become member of the EU, our openness from the EU side to see you as a member of the EU, but also brings together the wish to see more investments, more economic activity here in Serbia. And I think there are 3 issues. The first one boils down to what for the negotiation process for the EU, for the coming closer to the EU, is absolutely essential. And that is rule of law and governance. That is the whole issue of seeing to that the judiciary functions well, seeing to that the public administration delivers, seeing to that there is a continued fight against corruption, seeing to that international organized crime is addressed as such, and seeing to also that the democratic institutions functions and deliver what they should deliver in terms of their roles. And here lots have happened in this country, but there are also clearly issues that we need to be further addressed. And we have them set out in action plans that you have worked up and we have been part of addressing when it comes to what we call Chapter 23 and 24. And we very much invite you to continue to work on that issue. It is essential for the economy as well. I come back to it that when you ask investors what they believe are important for them to go into a country, they always mention corruption. They always mention the issue of judiciary and being able to get the ruling that is objective and clear. And you always mention also the functioning of public administration, just to mention three. The second element is the economic reforms. And here, I think I would like to commend what the economic reforms that has been taken. It's clear that the fiscal stability in this country is impressive. The growth rates are impressive. The way that the budget deficit has been turned around to a surplus. The debt curve that is going down. All that is fine. But I think that you would have an interest to look into how to further increase the structural reforms. And what I'm thinking of in particular in that context, to mention three, is informal economy, which is still quite huge in this country and which of course drains on the revenue side of the economy, but also talking about the level playing field has effects for the competition and the competitive situation. The second issue is state-owned enterprises, which in particular in the energy sector, but more generally, governance and reform of those are essential because they play both a role when it comes to negatively affect competition, but it also has, in particular in the energy sector, a role when it comes to getting investments into that sector and seeing to that private interest kind of an interest to come in and compete fully. And finally, I would argue very strongly also to look, and I come back to it, on the issue of the functioning of the public administration when it comes to business environment. And here in particular to see to that the environment for small and medium-sized enterprises linked to the financing that you mentioned, Minister, is going to be essential in order for that to strive. And finally, very essential for the EU path is the whole issue of reconciliation, the legacy of the path, which is very difficult here in this country, fully understandable, but it's something that needs also to be brought in. For us, from the EU side, it's impossible to bring in new countries which has not settled disputes with neighbors. And of course, in the case of Serbia, it is going to be essential that the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina leads to a positive result moving forward so that that can open up for both countries to move forward on the EU path. You will have support from us on all these issues. We have set out an agenda very strongly on support more generally. It is about socio-economic development, which will go in and support. It is about the security and migration, where we have worked very much closely, we continue to support on. It is about the digital agenda. It is about connectivity. It is about reconciliation, as I mentioned, and it is about rule of law and governance. And all of those areas we will work very hard, and we will see more investments from the EU side, and we look very, very much forward to continue to work with the government, with civil society, and with all the other actors in this country in order to move forward in the direction which is Serbia's wish, namely to come closer to the EU and ultimately become an EU member state. Thank you very much.
Nelson. Mr. Danielson, thank you very much. I've been informed that you are ready to take a couple of questions from the audience. First of all, thank you very much for coming to Kopaonik Business Forum, and especially thanks for your comprehensive address to the audience. We have been recently heard by French President Macron 2 years ago, and then the same statement was repeated 10 days ago by French Minister for EU Affairs, as well as from some other officials from the European Commission or from the member states of European Union, that there will be no enlargement until EU will be reformed. So, my question to you, is Serbia's accession to European Union mission possible or mission impossible? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. On the issue as such, the commitment from the member states are there. This is the commitment from the Sofia summit. It stands. It is also a commitment from repeated conclusions from the Council. The Council is the place where the member states are together and where they take common decisions. So that is the political reality when it comes to Serbia's path towards becoming a member of the EU. What is also true, and that is set out also in the strategy that the Commission presented in February, is that there is a need for reforms in the EU. And those reforms need also to take place. And we are pointing to both institutional reforms as well as reforms when it comes to the foreign policy areas, and there are some others. And I think this is a reality. It's a reality which has been there previously, with previous enlargements. I tend to be a Swede. This was the kind of message we heard in 1989, 90. There was a need for the EU to first take the steps when it comes to its own reforms, because before Sweden could be a member. And it was a message that I had the pleasure to send to nowadays colleagues from the countries, from the 10 and 12 countries, when they were on their path in the end of the 90s and the beginning of this century.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Christian, I join Alexander Vlahovic for there. Well, there is a belief in this society that it is eventually all about Kosovo. And I'm not asking about Kosovo. I'm asking about something that you pointed out, and Ambassador Fabrizi was a very good servant of all your member states yesterday in the panel. You mentioned rule of law. Could you dwell on this? So a few more words, more concretely, what do you expect from this country when it comes to reforming this part of the agenda, so the rule of law? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Goran. I think thanks for asking that question, because that gives me the opportunity to elaborate a bit. I would like to say rule of law and fundamental rights, because they go together. What we would like to see I'm not going into its all details, because they are well set up in the various documents we worked on together. But let me take a couple of issues. One is the constitutional change that is right now in Parliament, and which is about the functioning of the judiciary. It's essential that that is going to be adopted. Another is the very ambitious media strategy that was developed with civil society in order to see to that media becomes more independent and can play the role that media should do as holding the executive and other parts of society accountable, that media strategy can be implemented and put into place and also show result. The third one is something which has already been done and which is impressive, but we need to continue, of course, to be followed up. And that is when it comes to money laundering. I'm thinking of the FATF strategy that has gone over the last couple of months in this country. It's important that that continues to be very closely followed. Let me say this is not a problem only for Serbia. This is a problem that goes beyond. But every country needs to look into it very carefully, because it's not only about money being laundered, it is also about terrorist financing. And that is something, of course, which is essential. And it's also about corruption, fighting corruption. And that, I spoke with the Prime Minister yesterday, and I think she mentioned something very important in that context, which goes in line with what our experience with other countries who are facing problems with corruption. Transparency. Transparency is essential. And the whole issue of getting, for instance, public procurement into e-procurement, seeing to that decisions and processes are transparent and are the object for anybody to see is essential. And all that comes with what you mentioned, Minister, digital, E, is going to be essential in that project. I think in that context, I wouldn't like to leave the issue about public procurement, because public procurement is something which, from the EU side, is taken very seriously. And it's something where the public procurement legislation, as far as we see it, should be used for all projects that are of a public character. and be fully implemented. And of course, that is also in that context essential. Rule of law is also, and now it's more towards the business sector, rule of law is also essential when it comes to or I should say on corruption. What is also essential in corruption is to have a track record. So when there are corruption taking place, that measures are taken. So one thing is the prevention, and that is the transparency. But the other is the measures that are taken when corruption are being revealed. And here, the judicial reform is essential, but what is essential as well is to see track record and things happening. This is when people realize that corruption can't go on anymore. And that is when people, those who are doing it, realize that the costs are too there. I think these are some elements which are essential. Perhaps also one word on fighting international organized crime, which is a joint endeavor, where I think it's essential to have the necessary judicial structure, the necessary police structure, but also the cooperation with Europol is essential in that context. So there you have some elements which are essential.
Okay, thank you for this overview of where we are and where we should go. I would like to ask you to be a little more specific, if you can, on the economic side, on what other sectors that you think should be more reorganized or undergo structural change. And there are certain things that come to mind. You know, I don't know, I'm not going to lead you into an answer. I just want to point out, for example, the problem of energy efficiency, the pretty bad state of the ecology and the environment in Serbia, and the tremendous effort and financial and other that needs to be put into this. Perhaps you can give us your thoughts on what sectors you think would be the most important and what aspects of the economic reforms should be pushed a little more energetically. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what the Prime Minister said yesterday and what you ministers and Deputy Prime Minister said today is important. This concept of, on the one hand, keeping Serbia as a country for direct investments in automotive industry, pharmaceuticals, and all the rest, becoming part of the European value chain, will continue to be essential. But there is an issue about innovation, technology, and seeing to that there is a higher value added in terms of the economy in this country. And the digital is indeed very, very interesting, because if you look on how that one develops, it's really going up. I don't know whether I would be the one to say one needs to more state aid here. I think perhaps what is important is to have a very good level playing field, and seeing to that all those innovative forces that are there can grow and can get moving. So I think our advice would probably be that that is more important than to have big state funds that are going to involve here and there and left and right. That being said, clearly there's a need for state intervention and support when it comes to research, and clearly there is something in it when it comes to seeing to that the financial sector is prepared to give guarantees not only on collaterals but also on cash flows when it comes to small and medium-sized enterprises, in particular in the digital area. Energy, I think, is an essential area for, if somebody would ask me, which you did, where I think it's well advised for Serbia to focus. Why? Because when the economy is going to grow, and it is growing, and it should grow even more, then the demand for energy will increase. And it's going to be essential to have an energy sector which is efficient and is also open for the necessary investments. And people who are experts on this tell me that what is important in that context is the unbundling, essential. The other is to look into the governance of the state-owned enterprises so that they become more efficient and maybe also open up a bit for other actors to come in. And thirdly, I think it's going to be essential also, that's another element in fact, to see to that the energy sector contributes to fully to Serbia's commitment and political willingness to move forward on its commitment when it comes to the climate change. And here there is a need to move out from dependence on hydrocarbons, or at least some hydrocarbons, and move into issues such as energy efficiency, where there are huge elements, both for growth, but also for reducing dependence and becoming more efficient, and on alternative energy sources. And I think both of those elements are, all the three elements are interesting elements for the future.
So thank you very much, Mr. Danielson. That would be, sorry, we are behind the schedule and we need to finish this session. Thank you very much and molim vas da aplauzom još jednom pozdravimo gospodina Danielsona.